It's time for
All right, so we are continuing our lessons all about characters, and we are going to be learning all about the different characters in the book, The Stories Julian Tells. In the previous episodes, or with other strategies, we had been working on the character Julian, and so we're going to continue looking at him. Before we get started in the book, I want to show you some of the strategies that we have learned before and the new strategy that we're going to do today. So, when we're trying to get to know characters, there are many different things that we can do. Here are three strategies that we have learned so far, and a fourth one that we're going to practice today. One way that we can get to know characters is by getting to actually know them, looking at their physical. So like we could say this is a man, he's bald, he has no shoes, he's blue, or their personality, kind, considerate, patient. So there are two different types of traits we could look at when we're getting to know characters. As we are reading, we could also visualize the character. That means as we are reading, we could make a mental image of what the character looks like. For example, from the book The Stories Julian Tells, the author describes the father as being big and wild, with wild hair. So we can imagine Julian's father as being bigger than him, so there's like a little Julian, and having wild hair. Another strategy that we could use to get to know our characters better is we could focus on what the characters say and what the characters do. So we could think about, because the character said blank, I think this, we can learn more about them. Or, because the character did this, I think this. Today, we are going to be focusing on how characters respond to problems. In my opinion, this is my favorite strategy to help us get to know characters better. Because when we see characters react to a problem or a conflict, their reaction lets us know what type of person, what type of animal they are. So, in this little picture, there are two different reactions we're seeing. Oh no, a problem. Or, how can I fix it? So today, as we are rereading chapter 1, as we're going through it, we're going to really focus in on the problem of chapter 1. And we're going to see how Julian responds to it. How I'm going to keep track of Julian's response is I'm going to make what I like to call a conflict or problem mountain. So let me show you. So it's just a little mountain, and on the outside I'm going to write whatever conflicts or problems or challenges Julian faces. Those are going to go on the outside of my mountain. On the inside of my mountain, I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to write Julian's reactions. So now I'm looking at two things. I'm looking at what are the conflicts, what is the challenge, and what is Julian's reaction. And as I continue through the story, I can start building a case of what type of character Julian is. I can start building up evidence to help me see what type of character Julian is. Okay, so here we go. So we're rereading parts of chapter 1, The Pudding Like a Night on the Sea. Since we've already read this story, I'm going to go through it until we reach a problem. So here we go. I'm going to make something special for your mother, my father said. My mother was out shopping. My father was in the kitchen, looking at the pots and the pans and the jars of this and that. What are you going to make? I said. A pudding, he said. My father is a big man with wild black hair. When he laughs, the sun laughs in the window panes. When he thinks, you can almost see his thoughts sitting on all the tables and chairs. When he is angry, me and my little brother Huey shiver to the bottom of our shoes. "What kind of pudding will you make?" Huey said. "A wonderful pudding," my father said. "It will taste like a whole raft of lemons. It will taste like a night on the sea." Then he took down a knife and sliced 5 lemons in half. He squeezed the first one. Juice squirted in my eye. "Stand back," he said, and squeezed again. The seeds flew out on the floor. "Pick up those seeds, Huey," he said. Huey took the broom and swept them up. My father cracked some eggs and put the yolks in a pan and the whites in a bowl. He rolled up his sleeves and pushed back his hair and beat up the yolks. "Sugar, Julian," he said, and I poured in the sugar. He went on beating. Then he put in lemon juice and cream and set the pan on the stove. The pudding bubbled and he stirred it fast. Cream splashed on the stove. "Wipe that up, Huey," he said. Huey did. We haven't reached a problem yet, so I'm going to keep reading. It was hot by the stove. My father loosened his collar and pushed at his sleeves. The stuff in the pan was getting thicker and thicker. He held the beater up high in the air. "Just right," he said, and sniffed in the smell of the pudding. He whipped the egg whites and mixed them into the pudding. The pudding looked softer and lighter than air. "Done," he said. He washed all the pots, splashing water on the floor, and wiped the counter so fast his hair made circles around his head. "Perfect," he said. "Now I'm going to take a nap. If something important happens, bother me. If nothing important happens, don't bother me. And the pudding is for your mother. Leave the pudding alone." He went to the living room and was asleep in a minute, sitting straight up in his chair. Huey and I guarded the pudding. "Oh, it's a wonderful pudding," Huey said. "With waves on the top like the ocean," I said. "I wonder how it tastes," Huey said. "Leave the pudding alone," I said. "If I just put my finger in there, I'll know how it tastes," Huey said. And he did it. "You did it," I said. "How does it taste?" "It tastes like a whole raft of lemons," he said. "It tastes like a night on the sea." "You've made a hole in the pudding," I said. "But since you did it, I'll have a taste." And it tasted like a whole night of lemons. It tasted like floating at sea. "It's such a big pudding," Huey said. "It can't hurt to have a little more." "Since you took more, I'll have more," I said. "That was a bigger lick than I took," Huey said. "I'm going to have more again." So let me pause for a second, and I'm going to think, have we reached any conflicts, any problems, or any challenges? I wouldn't say there's been a conflict. There's nothing that's making me go, "Oh," but there is a problem. Julian's father told them to leave the pudding alone. And then Huey tries the pudding. So Huey doesn't listen. But what is Julian's reaction to that? First, Huey's wondering how it tastes, and Julian says, "Leave the pudding alone." So he's being responsible. But then over here, if I just put my finger in there, I'll know how it tastes. And he does it. What does Julian do? He says, "You've made a hole in the pudding. But since you did it, I'll have a taste." So let me pause so I can add to my mountain. And I'm going to make it a little bit closer so you all can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to add to my mountain. So first, the problem or challenge is that Huey tries the pudding. And then how does Julian react? Tell your neighbor, tell a partner, tell yourself. Write it down if you need to. Right. So Julian also tries the pudding because Huey did. So it looks like Julian is falling to peer pressure. He's doing something because he saw someone else do it, even though we saw on the previous page that he knew that that wasn't right. Let's keep reading to see. Maybe he changes. Alright, so I'm going to reread the last sentence that we were just looking at. So, that was a bigger lick than I took, Huey said. I'm going to have more again. Whoops, I said. You put in your whole hand, Huey said. Look at the pudding you spilled on the floor. I'm going to clean it up, I said, and I took the rag from the sink. That's not really clean, Huey said. It's the best I can do, I said. Look at the pudding, Huey said. It looked like craters on the moon. We have to smooth this over, I said, so it looks the way it did before. Let's get spoons. And we evened the top of the pudding with spoons. And while we evened it, we ate some more. All right. So now our problem is getting bigger. So the boys keep eating the pudding. So the problem is, I would say, there is not a lot of pudding left, and there are holes. So there are holes in the pudding. So what are the boys' reaction? Or Julian and Huey's reaction? They grab spoons and try to clean it up. But as they're grabbing the spoons, they're still eating it. So they try to smooth the holes over, but I'm going to do a little arrow. It leads to the next problem or challenge. They keep eating the pudding. So they keep eating the pudding. So let's see how they respond to that challenge, because they tried to fix it, but they keep eating the pudding. So I'm going to go back to where we were. There isn't much left, I said. We were supposed to leave the pudding alone, Huey said. We'd better get away from here, I said. We ran into our bedroom and crawled under the bed. So, right away, I'm going to just write it right away. They keep eating the pudding, and then Julian's answer to realizing there isn't much pudding left, he decides to hide. So, they run and hide. So as soon as they got into a big issue, and as soon as they really reached the conflict that there is like no pudding left, they run and hide. Instead of facing their problem, they run and hide. What is that teaching us about the type of character Julian is? What is that teaching us? Let's keep reading to see if we can gather more information. Come into the kitchen, dear, he said. I have something for you. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't read up here. After a long time, we heard my father's voice. Come into the kitchen, dear, he said. I have something for you. Why, what is it? My mother said, out in the kitchen. Under the bed, Huey and I pressed ourselves to the wall. Look, said my father, out in the kitchen, a wonderful pudding. Where is the pudding? My mother said. Where are you boys? My father said. His voice went through every crack and corner in the house. We felt like two leaves in a storm. Where are you? I said. My father's voice was booming. Huey whispered to me, I'm scared. We heard my father walking slowly through the rooms. Huey, he called. Julian. We could see his feet. He was coming into our room. He lifted the bedspread. There was his face and his eyes like black lightning. He grabbed us by the legs and pulled. "Stand up," he said. We stood. All right, so now they're facing their father. Let's see what happens. "What do you have to tell me?" he said. "We went outside," Huey said, "and when we came back, the pudding was gone." "Then why were you hiding under the bed?" my father said. We didn't say anything. We looked at the floor. "I can tell you one thing," he said. "There is going to be some beating here now. There is going to be some whipping." The curtains at the windows were shaking. Huey was holding my hand. "Go into the kitchen," my father said. "Right now." We went into the kitchen. So let me hold on. All right, so they run and hide. And then their father finds them. And their father asks them, "What do you have to tell me?" So now we've reached this big moment of our conflict, a big problem. So their father finds them and asks them what happened. So first we know that Huey lies. Huey does not. Huey tells a story. He's like, "We went outside." But Julian doesn't correct Huey. Instead, Julian stays silent. So he doesn't give an answer at all. So when he reaches this big moment, first he tried to hide, and now he's just not even talking. He's just staying silent. "Come here, Huey," my father said. Huey walked toward him, his hands behind his back. "See these eggs?" my father said. He cracked them and put the yolks in a pan and set the pan on the counter. He stood a chair by the counter. "Stand up here," he said to Huey. He stood on the chair by the counter. "Now it's time for your beating," my father said. Huey started to cry. His tears fell in with the egg yolks. "Take this," my father said. My father handed him the egg beater. "Now beat those eggs," he said. "I want this to be a good beating." "Oh," Huey said. He stopped crying and he beat the yolks. "Now you, Julian, stand here," my father said. I stood on a chair by the table. "I hope you're ready for your whipping." I didn't answer. I was afraid to say yes or no. "Here," he said, and he set the egg whites in front of me. "I want these whipped and whipped well." "Yes, sir," I said, and started whipping. My father watched us. My mother came into the kitchen and watched us. After a while, Huey said, "This is hard work." "That's too bad," my father said. "Your beating's not done." And he added sugar and cream and lemon juice to Huey's pan and put the pan on the stove. And Huey went on beating. "My arm hurts from whipping," I said. "That's too bad," my father said. "Your whipping's not done." So I whipped, and Huey beat and beat. "Hold the beater in the air, Huey," my father said. Huey held it in the air. "See?" my father said. "A good pudding stays on the beater. It's thick enough now. Your beating's done." Then he turned to me. "Let's see those egg whites, Julian," he said. They were puffed up and fluffy. "Congratulations, Julian," he said. "Your whipping's done." He mixed the egg whites into the pudding himself. Then he passed the pudding to my mother. "A wonderful pudding," she said. "Would you like some, boys?" "No, thank you," we said. She picked up a spoon. "Why, this tastes like a whole raft of lemons," she said. "This tastes like a night on the sea." And so that is the end of our first chapter. So let's see what we have so far. Let's take a look at what we learned about Julian. Remember, the strategy that we are working on is We are studying how characters respond to problems, and we are focusing on Julian. So let's see how he responded to the conflicts and problems in this first chapter. Now this, what I'm showing you, is a really quick and easy way that you as a reader can keep track of how characters respond to problems. Because this is a chapter book, I might even label this chart chapter 1, and then I might do another chart for chapter 2, depending on my story, because the stories Julian tells has different stories inside. Let me see, find my table of contents. Because each one of these is a different story, I'm going to do a different chart for each story. But if, say, your chapter book is the same story, you might just make a really big chart and keep track of every single reaction or the most important reactions to conflicts, problems, or challenges. So let's see how Julian does. When Huey tries the pudding, Julian also tries the pudding because Huey did. When there's not a lot of pudding left and there are holes, remember they said the pudding looked like craters, Julian tried to smooth the holes over, but that led to a different conflict or challenge because they kept eating the pudding. Once they look and see there's not much pudding left and they realize they're in big trouble because they did not listen to their dad, Julian and Huey decide to run and hide. So instead of facing their problem, they ran and hid from it. Then, at the big problem, when their father finds them and asks them what happens, instead of telling the truth, Huey tells the story. And instead of owning up, being the big brother, Julian stays silent. So what could we learn about Julian? Take a second, tell yourself, tell a partner, write it down. What could we learn about Julian based on this? And you could even say, for right now, when Julian faces a problem, he responds by, so I'm going to move this so you all can see. There we go. Okay, so when Julian faces a problem, he responds by. Tell yourself, tell a neighbor, and I want you to use this to help you organize it or write it in your journal. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it based on what we've read so far. When Julian faces a problem, how does he respond? So some things you could have said. When Julian faces a problem, he responds by running away or escaping. We could say when he faces a problem, he does not address it, so he doesn't face it. Or we could say, I'm going to move this. There we go. Or we could say, when he responds by getting scared. He gets scared because he knows he did something wrong. And by him being scared, he runs away, he tries to escape it, he does not address it or face it. When you go off to read your own chapter books, this is some of the good, strong reader work that you could do on your own. So, next time we meet, we'll do a brand new strategy. Until next time, bye!